Michelle Leety is a comm staffer for the Virginia Parent-Teacher Association in Fairfax, Virginia.
Oh, we haven't talked about them in a day.
She's also a first vice president of the local NAACP. At a recent rally in opposition to those who are in opposition to critical race theory indoctrination, she had this to say to the rallygoers.
So let's meet and remain steadfast in speaking truth, tearing down double standards, and refuting double talk. Let's not allow any double downing on lies. Let's prepare our children for a world they deserve. Let's deny this off-key band of people that are anti-education, anti-teacher, anti-equity, anti-history, anti-racial reckoning, anti-opportunities, anti-health people, anti-diversity, anti-platform, anti-science, anti-change agent, anti-social justice, anti-healthcare, anti-worker, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-children, anti-healthcare, anti-worker, anti-environment, anti-emissions policy change, anti-inclusion, anti-live and let live people. Let them die. Don't let these uncomfortable people deter us from our bold march forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I think she was fine with all the antis, even when they became repetitive. It's when she said, let them die, referring to critical race theory opponents, that she got into a bit of a trouble. So she was ousted from her comms position with the Fairfax, Virginia Parent Teachers Association. No word on her status as a first vice president of the local NAACP. But it's an interesting one that Northern Virginia has become the sort of the primary battleground for critical race theory, because enough parents have decided to stand up and oppose the sort of ignorance and intolerance and hatred that you heard expressed by Miss Leety. So it's interesting that it's happening there. It's also interesting because you have the proponents of critical race theory so demonstrable in their support. So it's really providing, I think, a nice lens for which the country to view this discussion, even when it descends into the silly as it did there. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Peter Berkowitz, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, former Director of Policy Planning at the U.S. State Department. Peter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So, do you see what you're seeing in Northern Virginia over the last couple of months? Is that going to replicate itself around the country, or is there enough institutional inertia behind people like Michelle Leety that they will ultimately win the day and continue to lord over the institutions, at least in K through college education systems?
Well, there's certainly reason for intense concern, not only for Northern Virginia, but in schools throughout the country. I mean, it's a big mistake to think that the explosion of interest and controversy around critical theory somehow signifies that the issue is new. Actually, the transformation of the curricula for K through 12 schools in this country has been underway for years, even for decades. It's deeply rooted, and I'm actually delighted to see grassroots movements around the country that are trying to expose the way in which proponents of critical race theory seek to indoctrinate the nation's children.
You say it's been around for decades?
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, some of those who defend critical race theory say, well, this is an obscure academic discipline. It was invented by law professors 40 or 50 years ago. By the way, that part is true. It was an obscure doctrine invented by, let's say, law professors and some other academics, but it's been percolating through the system, down through the law schools, into undergraduate education, into our education schools, and that's been carried forward there into to our schools. Now, it's not always called critical race theory, but the idea that America's founding principles are somehow indissolubly bound up with racism, and that the core truth about the American experiment in liberty is racism, and that the country is in need of profound transformation. These are not ideas that have suddenly been introduced into the curriculum last year. They have been in the curriculum for a long time.
Yeah, and so that one thing they say, on the one hand, they say it's this esoteric theory taught in a few law schools. It's not taught in K through 12. That's one of the arguments made, even while they're promoting it in middle school. And you've got the national or the IFT, AFT, American Federation of Teachers, that is, at their confab promoting Ibram Kendi's new book and telling we're going to get it into every K through 12 system in America, or we're going to try. So so the one argument is it's not really in K through 12. This is being invented by opponents of critical race theory because they're afraid of diversity. The other play is to say what is really afoot here is they're opposed to critical race theory because they don't want to teach the true history of America. So, for example, Jeffrey Dingler grew up in rural Alabama. He's got a piece, an op-ed over at Newsweek. I heard about the Ku Klux Klan for the first time when I was 14. The way I remember it, my 8th grade teacher informed us during an English class the KKK wasn't so bad at first. It started out as a vigilante force for defenseless Southerners who were being preyed upon by Yankees and free black Americans during Reconstruction. Of course, this isn't true. The Klan was always about racial oppression and white terrorism, but that's not how I learned about it in public school. And he goes on to say it wasn't the Civil War, it was the War of Northern Aggression, and we didn't learn enough about civil rights and so on and so forth. So bad was his K through 12 education that he's a graduate of Skidmore College. So, and I wonder where he really learned his views about, critical race theory, whether it was in K through 12 or at Skidmore. But that's the other argument they make, is you're just afraid of teaching the truth about slavery, about Jim Crow, about the racist institutions and the oppression of blacks and others throughout American history.
Yes, well, I think that such statements render the actual history of the last 50 years in the United States totally unrecognizable. What are these people talking about? Since in the 1960s, in 1967, the biggest movie star in Hollywood was a man named Sidney Poitier, a black actor. He had won the Best Actor award in 1964 for Lilies of the Field. In 1967, he was starring in 3 films: To Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. That's film and TV in the 70s. We had All in the Family, which gave rise to the Jeffersons, produced many other television shows that dealt with questions of race and justice. Daniel Patrick Moynihan in the mid-1960s, working in the Johnson administration, published what came to be known as the Moynihan Report, arguing that if we really want to achieve equality in this country, we have to go beyond civil rights legislation to address the breakdown of the black family in inner cities. And then since 1968, with Bakke versus Regents of University of California, Berkeley, we've been having a nationwide debate about affirmative action, not only in universities, but in government hiring and in private hiring. So, of course, people are going to be able to tell anecdotes about this classroom or that classroom, this teacher or that teacher getting things wrong. But I've not seen really, the people who've been making this argument, I've not seen a citation of any critic of critical race theory who believes that the truth about race in America should not be taught. I think that's a total canard.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that it also just runs afoul of what's actually happening in the classroom and has been for, 50 years at least, probably longer than that. And interestingly, also in the classroom, one of the standard texts to understanding American history is Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, which has been around for the last 40 years almost in classrooms throughout America. And, that's a completely, basically Marxist lens through which we understand American history, at least those who are using that as their textbook.
I think that's right. And if there's any striking deficit in American classrooms these days, it's in teaching students straightforwardly what are the principles on which this country is founded, what is the nature of the American form of constitutional government. And to tell you the truth, transmitting to students the accurate understanding that as far as large, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional countries, the United States is the freest, most pluralist, and most tolerant that there's ever been.
So if this is going to be felled on the merits, if we're going to push back against critical race theory and this sort of indoctrination and neo-segregation that's being pushed on a de facto basis rather than a de jure one by these individuals who want to institute a new racial order, where is that going to come from? Because, I mean, for example, in the elite circles, this piece in the New York Post over the weekend, the New York City's top schools, this is a good example. The Ethical Cultural Fieldstone School, which is on the market for a ballet instructor, you know, like the ballet instructors you used to have in your school. But the ballet instructor must be, quote, committed to challenging Western dance forms and the hierarchical and pedagogical practices that often center whiteness in dance classrooms and on stages. And it's like that for every discipline at these elite schools. So it doesn't seem likely that it's going to come from a Grace Church school or Ethical Cultural Fieldstone School. So if it is going to come at all, where is it going to come from?
Well, I'm certainly not confident that it will come from administrators at these schools or from teachers at these schools. You can't expect it to come from the students. They're there to be educated, not to educate the administrators and teachers. My hope, therefore, is first with the parents, and indeed, what we are witnessing in the last year is the rise of one of the great, I hope, grassroots movements of my lifetime. That is, parents rising up, addressing school boards, demanding that their children not be subject to indoctrination, but rather that in the classrooms facts be transmitted and that their sons and daughters be taught to think for themselves. So parents have to take action with their local school boards. There are steps for state legislators and federal legislators to take concerning federal legislators. There's one bill, I think it's being contemplated by Senator Cott's office, which would deny federal funding to schools that promulgate critical race theory. State legislatures can developing similar bills, but I should add one caveat. I myself am opposed to any language that speaks of banning critical race theory. It's much better for those who oppose the critical race theory to insist that our schools should not be used to espouse, advocate, demand assent to these doctrines. That's the real problem, not letting students know at the proper age, of course, that there are people who assert that America's institutions are systematically racist. The problem is insisting that this is the absolute truth about America, or demanding that students sort themselves into groups, and that some people, because of the color of their skin, deserve less. Some people, because of the color of their skin, deserve more. That's odious, and that sort of indoctrination should be prohibited. Yeah,
so I'm in agreement with you theoretically, but here's the real world challenge, and I know you're going to see this coming. Look, I'm happy to take on Derek Bell and Ibram Kendi straight away. That's how it should be. But the reality is in these classrooms, Shelby Steele, Bob Woodson, Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, those scholars and anybody who thinks like them are banned. So you're not going to get that arena where ideas are juxtaposed against one another and you hash it out intellectually. You're only going to get Kendi and D'Angelo and Derek Bell. So how does that operate in the real world if you have those in charge marginalizing any dissent or competing theories about societal organization?
It's a great question, and yes, I have partly anticipated it. It's just, from my point of view, it's too dangerous to be participating in censorship in a free country. But I'm not opposed to mandating. So I would be in favor of bills that find a way to mandate that the full range of views be presented to students. But of course, you have to learn to walk before you learn to run. I do not expect a third grade classroom to be a graduate seminar in which the full range of views about the American founding are presented. It seems to me only sensible to start with the straightforward view about the American founding, which emphasizes that the United States was the first country anywhere in human history to be based upon a universal principle said to apply to all human beings, namely freedom and equality. And eventually, students learn that the United States did not honor that principle fully, the fights over it, and so on. But go back to your central point. I'm still opposed to banning, but I would back a bill that mandates, with sanctions, mandates that a range of views be taught in class, because that fights the biggest problem. The biggest problem is indoctrination.
He is Peter Berkowitz, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, former Director of Policy Planning at the State Department as well. Peter, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.